Have you ever lived through a moment that, without noticing at first, completely changed the way you see life? I thought I was just beginning another shift, one of those busy days when you walk into the hospital already knowing it's going to be relentless. Patients coming in, tests to review, protocols to follow. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Until one unexpected consultation made me stop. Across from my desk sat a man whose eyes carried something I couldn't quite name. It was a strange mixture of weariness and courage, as if he had finally gathered the strength to reveal something he had been hiding for years. On his medical chart, just another common diagnosis in the hospital routine. But in the silence between us, I could feel there was a story greater than any clinical data could ever show. And in that instant, without realizing it, I was about to hear a confession that would forever change the way I understood medicine and humanity. He entered the room slowly, as if carrying the weight of many lives on his shoulders. Around 40 years old, his skin marked not only by time, but by hardship. At first, he avoided my gaze, as if shielding himself from yet another rejection. The diagnosis was already written, HIV. For many, just another line on paper, a clinical detail requiring specific protocols and routine medication. But for him, it was a burden far heavier than any statistic. My role as a doctor had always been clear: examine, prescribe, advise. And yet, from the moment he stepped through the door, I sensed this consultation would be different. This wasn't just a body asking for treatment. It was a human being in need of being heard. Still, so used to the hospital's frantic pace, I instinctively followed the usual script: quick questions, lab orders, formal notes. But as I typed on the screen, I felt his silent eyes on me, waiting for something more than technical answers. He introduced himself with a shy smile, told me he worked in odd jobs, always struggling to pay the rent. He had no close family. When he mentioned his friends, his voice broke. Some drifted away after the diagnosis, he said, as if trying to normalize the pain. I knew HIV was no longer the death sentence it once was. Scientific advances had transformed the prognosis, allowing many to live long and healthy lives. But prejudice still weighed heavier than the virus itself. As I listened, I remembered how medical school trained us to decode symptoms, classify illnesses, propose conduct, but no one prepared us for the silence heavy with shame. No one taught us how to meet the eyes of someone who fears not death, but loneliness and judgment. And that was exactly what I saw before me. He spoke of how he discovered the diagnosis: a persistent fever, tests that took too long, the unexpected phone call confirming what he already feared. He said the world collapsed in that moment, not because he thought he'd die soon, but because he didn't know how to tell people. Slowly, doors began to close. Co-workers avoided him. Neighbors whispered. Even within his family, he felt watched, as if he no longer belonged. I listened and at the same time reflected. How many times had I treated patients with HIV without stopping to think about the human impact behind the diagnosis? How often had I reduced a life to protocols, offering nothing more than formulas and instructions? It was painful to admit, but I realized I too had contributed, even indirectly, to the isolation many patients carry. And yet, he didn't speak with bitterness. There was a surprising calm in his words, as though he had accepted the cruelty of the world, but still left room for hope. "Doctor, I don't just want to live longer, I want to live for real." That sentence echoed within me. It wasn't a complaint about pain, nor a request for extra medication. It was a plea for dignity, for being seen beyond the virus. That moment felt like a turning point. The medicine I had practiced until then seemed small compared to the magnitude of what he shared. It was as if the hospital, with all its structure, had no answer for the question he was truly asking. And then I understood something simple, yet profound. Sometimes what heals most is not in a prescription, but in true listening. As he spoke, a thought pierced me. How many stories like his have passed me by, unnoticed? How many patients had I treated as numbers, never realizing the invisible weight they carried? I didn't know it yet, but this was only the first layer of a much deeper revelation. Right there, in the cold stillness of a hospital room, medicine stopped being only about science and became also about humanity. If you appreciate stories that reveal this other side of medicine, the human side, full of reflection, subscribe to the channel now. Here, each account goes far beyond a clinical case. They are lives, lessons, emotions that deserve to be remembered. He told me he was fine. The words came out fast, almost rehearsed, as if trying to convince me, or perhaps himself, that life was under control. "I'm taking my meds properly, doctor. I've got nothing to complain about." The smile that accompanied the phrase was artificial, and his eyes betrayed the truth. It was as if behind that forced calm there stood a wall built with great effort. I had seen this before in other patients. The attempt to appear strong, not to be a burden, to hide pain so as not to be labeled fragile. But there was something in his tone that struck me. It wasn't just a social mask. It was almost a disguised cry for help. I continued the consultation as usual, checked his tests, reinforced adherence to treatment, stressed the importance of follow-ups. He listened, nodded and repeated, "Yes, doctor, I know. Everything's fine." But between phrases, there were long pauses, deeper breaths than necessary, and his eyes dropped to the floor whenever I tried to hold his gaze. It was then, in one of those silences, that he let out a phrase almost imperceptible. "Sometimes I think it'd be easier if, well, never mind." He cut himself off and changed the subject. That fragment was the spark, the first crack in the armor he had built. I didn't need any manual to understand there was much more hidden behind those words. I asked him about his daily routine. He said he carried boxes at a warehouse, rarely went out, and avoided making new friends. When I asked why, he gave me a half-truth. "Doctor, nowadays you just can't trust anyone." I knew it wasn't just mistrust, it was fear. Fear of rejection, fear of someone discovering his diagnosis, fear of becoming the target of cruel remarks. The lie wasn't in what he said, but in what he hid. He didn't want to admit he was lonely. He didn't want to say aloud that stigma hurt more than side effects. That was the rupture. This was no longer a patient asking for medical advice, but a human being pleading to be seen beyond the disease. I took a deep breath. I realized that if I stuck only to protocol, I would lose the chance to reach what he was, timidly, trying to share. With every unspoken phrase, with every prolonged silence, I understood more clearly. He needed someone to listen without judgment, so I broke the cold sequence of medical questions. I looked at him and said, "You don't have to pretend you're okay here. You can talk." For a moment he looked surprised. His eyes filled with restrained tears and his body relaxed, as if he had finally found a safe space. In that second, the consultation room stopped being just a clinical setting. It became a place of confession, of release. He took a deep breath and murmured, "Doctor, the hardest part isn't the illness. The hardest part is living hidden." That phrase etched itself into me. It was as though he had opened the door to a dark room where his deepest pains had been locked away. The truth he had tried to hide with forced smiles and rehearsed answers now stood clear. It wasn't HIV that suffocated him, but loneliness, prejudice, and the constant fear of rejection. As I listened, I realized I was facing something far greater than any treatment could resolve. This consultation wasn't just about physical health, it was about dignity, about giving voice to someone silenced too many times by stigma. And it was then, in witnessing that break of silence, that I understood medicine could be much more than tests and protocols. It could be the space where someone finally feels seen. After that outpouring for a few minutes, I felt unexpected relief. It seemed as though we had crossed an invisible bridge between doctor and patient. He smiled, more genuinely this time, and said he felt a little lighter. I believed I had reached what every consultation should aim for: understanding, guidance, comfort. I felt victorious, convinced the appointment had been a success. But deep inside, a small voice warned me there was more than what appeared. In the following days, as I reviewed charts and saw other patients, that illusion of control started to crumble. He returned to his routines, kept up appearances, avoided deeper conversations. On the surface, all was well. Inside, the battle continued. I hadn't yet grasped how heavy silence could be, how each gesture of rejection had piled up over the years. Then I noticed something I had missed at first. He had developed small rituals of protection, subtle ways to keep emotional a distance. Sometimes he smiled to hide tears. Sometimes he avoided calling family, afraid of judgment. What I thought was momentary relief was nothing but a fragile shield. Reflecting on this, I realized that medicine, no matter how advanced in treatment and technology, still meets its limits when facing invisible human suffering. We can prescribe drugs, order exams, follow protocols, but we cannot erase fear, loneliness, or the silent pain many patients endure. And that's why I chose to share this story here. Each story we bring is not just clinical narrative, but an invitation to reflect on empathy and humanity. If you're not yet subscribed, join us. Because each testimony goes beyond disease. It shows lives that teach us about courage, resilience, and compassion. Even with that apparent victory, I realized there was still a hidden layer, a space inside him I hadn't reached yet. And that gap would become the next chapter of our story, a moment of rising tension when I would understand even more intensely that medicine is not limited to diagnoses and treatments, but demands the courage to hear what isn't said. As the office fell silent after he left, I felt the control I thought I had was an illusion. I had followed the protocol exactly, but the essence of what he carried remained intact, waiting to be understood. And that realization silently, profoundly, changed the way I would see every patient from that day on. In the days after, subtle signs began to appear. Short phone calls, messages that seemed to ask more than they said. Each word carried unspoken anguish. Each silence was a hidden plea. My sense of having resolved something quickly crumbled. He was still fighting alone against stigma and loneliness. During a routine check, he casually mentioned he avoided support groups because he felt judged even among people with similar experiences. At that moment, I understood the true dimension of the problem. No matter how effective the treatment, there is no medicine that cures the invisibility so many patients feel when they are reduced to their diagnosis. What he needed was more than protocols, more than pills. He needed understanding, constant presence, something that even the most organized hospital routines struggled to provide. The weight of responsibility began to hit me. I wanted to help him, but every attempt felt limited. Tension grew with each visit because the line between respecting his space and offering support was fragile. A simple gesture could feel invasive. Silence could feel like indifference. It was a delicate balance, one that could break at any moment. He shared a painful memory, a friend who walked away as soon as he learned of the diagnosis. He spoke of missed gatherings, laughter cut short, unanswered invitations. Each story reinforced the isolation he carried. I felt powerless in the face of so much invisible pain and realized the limits of traditional medicine. Our appointments were no longer just consultations. They had become encounters with a reality few professionals allow themselves to face so closely. It was during one of those talks that he hesitated, breathed deeply, and said, "Doctor." Sometimes I think no one understands what it's like to be in my place. In that moment, the illusion of control I once felt vanished. Tension reached its peak. The difference between prescribing medicine and truly touching lives became painfully clear. That's when I realized stories like his deserve to be told. And that's why I invite you watching this now to subscribe to the channel. Each testimony is not mere content, it's an opportunity to reflect, to understand, to witness the humanity behind every diagnosis, to see that attentive listening and empathy can transform lives, often more than any prescription. The tension kept growing. The more I tried to approach him, the more I became aware of the invisible walls. Years of rejection, fear, accumulated pain that don't vanish overnight. The escalation wasn't just his, it was mine too. I was learning, sometimes painfully, that every patient is a complex story and that medicine expands when we look beyond the medical chart. And so, between silences, small confessions, timid attempts at closeness, the tension became almost tangible. What seemed a simple consultation turned into a deep dive into human experience, where protocols and scientific knowledge were only a fraction of what it means to truly care for someone. The turning point came in a moment that seemed ordinary. He entered my office with hesitant steps, eyes more tired than before. But there was something different, a silent determination I hadn't seen before. I sat across from him, ready for routine, but sensed this wouldn't be just another visit. He began to speak slowly, choosing each word carefully. He told me of the years spent hiding his condition, of friendships that vanished as soon as they found out, of family members who couldn't handle it. Each phrase carried the weight of accumulated loneliness, of experiences no one should carry alone. I realized the masks he had worn until then were finally falling. "Doctor, I've never told this to anyone," he whispered. And there it was. The outpouring I had sensed since the first consultation, the core of suffering I could only imagine. He revealed that for years, what haunted him was not the illness itself, but people's judgment, the silent prejudice that corrodes more than any virus. He spoke of sleepless nights, hidden tears, and a sense of invisibility no medicine could treat. As I listened, I felt a storm of emotions, sadness, helplessness, but also deep reverence. The medicine I knew, focused on diagnosis, protocol, outcome, seemed insufficient against the truth he was sharing. I understood instantly and viscerally that caring for someone is far more than prescribing. It is recognizing the humanity behind each patient. He spoke of small gestures that gave him hope. A friendly conversation, an attentive gaze, a professional who didn't just ask clinical questions but truly listened. That's when I realized that without noticing, I had begun to play that role for him. The difference wasn't in the tests, but in presence, in attention, in validating his feelings. What he revealed changed everything for me. The way I saw medicine, my patients, even myself, it all shifted. I understood how often we treat symptoms without seeing the whole person, and how, for many, healing doesn't lie in medication, but in genuine listening, in care that sees beyond the disease. As he spoke, my mind revisited every past consultation, every patient who might have carried similar pains silently. And I grasped that medicine is not only science, it is, above all, humanity in action. Every act of attention can be the difference between feeling invisible and being seen. And in that revelation, a new sense of responsibility overwhelmed me. I knew I had to share this experience to show there is another side of medicine, one not found in textbooks, but in real life, in the stories every patient carries. If you're listening now, subscribe and follow along. Every story here is a chance to learn empathy, to practice attentive care, to recognize the humanity around us. He ended the conversation with a faint smile, a mixture of relief and hope. And I, sitting at my desk, realized I would never again look at medicine the same way. It wasn't just about protocols or diagnoses. It was about people, about lives that deserve to be understood and respected. The climax of this story came when, for the first time, he let himself open up completely. No more masks, no rehearsed smiles. Every word was raw truth, painful and liberating at once. He told me about the day he almost gave up, when he felt invisible even to health professionals who should have cared. He recalled moments when silence was his only refuge, when family comments made him doubt his own worth. The moment was intense. I found my own breathing synchronizing with his, as if we were connected. Every confession, every contained tear carried years of suffering. And then he said something that echoed forever. "Doctor, I just needed someone to truly see me." The simplicity of the phrase carried immense weight. For years he had survived, but not lived fully. And I understood that traditional medicine could never make up for the absence of genuine attention. In that instant, something shifted inside me. I realized my earlier sense of victory, thinking clinical treatment solved everything, was nothing but illusion. The true transformation was happening there, in that silent exchange of humanity and trust. I wasn't just treating an illness. I was part of a process of recognition, something that cannot be measured in exams or prescriptions. With emotion rising, I moved beyond protocol. I leaned closer, held his gaze and said, "I see you. Not just your condition, but who you are, your pain, your strength." He breathed deeply and for the first time allowed himself a genuine smile, a smile carrying years of suppressed relief, the sense of finally being understood. As he stood to leave, he thanked me, not with mechanical words, but with a handshake that carried silent, profound gratitude. In that moment, I realized medicine had expanded into something greater. Attentive listening and human presence could be as transformative as any treatment. That experience marked me forever, and I knew I could never approach patients the same way again. Every consultation from then on carried the awareness that care goes far beyond technique. Reflecting on that connection, I felt an even greater responsibility to tell this story, to share this experience. So,